Happy New Year, and welcome to season 2 of UX Leadership by Design, the podcast by and for UX design leaders. I'm your host, Mark Baldino. The podcast is and always will be brought to you by Fuzzy Math, the user experience design consultancy that brings consumer grade UX to the enterprise. We provide digital product design and partner with internal design teams to ensure they have the right people in the right seats, applying the right process. And today we're fortunate enough to speak with Bryn McCoy, who, outside of being a design leader herself, runs a coaching and innovation firm called Mineral. And we hit on a number of pressing topics as we wrap up 2023 and start 2024, including what we've been hearing in a lot of one-on-one conversations with our fellow design and business leaders. And one trend that we're hearing, exhaustion. This has been a draining year, a draining few years. And we talk about really the need to carve out time for personal and creative development, to recharge and allowing ourselves the time to do that. And really how we can expand that to our team by prioritizing cultural health within our organizations. So, Bryn is great. The conversation's great. I think you're going to love the episode. Just want to thank you for joining us. Bryn, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to be here with you.
Well, I appreciate you joining us for this episode. Super excited about a conversation we're going to be having. As I asked most of the guests, if not all the guests, would just love if you could give folks a bit about your background, how you got into design. I know you've had a super interesting and fairly dynamic career. So I think the audience would kind of love to hear about your background and how you got to where you are now.
Okay, sure. So I am lifelong maker in tech. I was one of the kids who rather go back to school for coding camp instead of going to sports camp as a youngin. So I moved into software engineering as a teen through college and found my way into design. I don't know, probably about 10 years into my career. I just cared a lot about what we were making and how it was showing up in the world. And I'm not even sure if UX really existed yet, but thinking about the experience of what we're making for the people who are using things, that was just a perfect fit to the way that I was thinking about things and making things. And so I've been still, even as a design leader, I'm always making something. I think at the heart of it all, I'm a maker. And then, you just realize the importance of how you connect with people who use the things and the people that you collaborate with. So I guess that's the short answer of how I
Yeah.
got here.
Yeah, how have the roles that you've taken changed? And I'm kind of interested in that sort of maker component because I think a lot of people earlier in their career as designers see themselves as makers. Maybe they come from kind of a maker background, personal or professional. And then as they start to get into the leadership, maybe management world, they're making a lot less, and maybe
Mhm.
other people are making. Like, how's that transition been for you? Maybe you've been able to keep yourself a maker throughout, but is that like, has
Mhm.
your approach changed? Has the role changed? Are you still able to make?
All of it has changed. And I am still able to make. Thinking about management and leadership, I've always kind of felt like a big part of that role is taking some responsibility for just, how it feels to collaborate and to build excitement and for people to be enthusiastic about what we're doing. And for me, the creativity, just the kind of the element we're exploring creatively is what brings a lot of that energy. So even if I'm not making on the job, like for my clients, in whatever role, I always have something going on. And that's what keeps me energized, kind of keeps me close to that process. And, it's always just kind of stretching my perspective. So, my roles have definitely been all over the place. I started my career as a software engineer. I moved into product management before even moving into design. And then, even as a design leader, I bring a lot of product management into the way I work. And I think another really energizing piece of it for me is I just have this entrepreneurial sense. And so, with the management responsibilities, I'm always kind of thinking about what's important to leverage for the business and what's exciting to break through as a maker. And that tends to be a fun collaboration across all the different disciplines that are working together, and helps break down those silos.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think to the benefit of the people that you're working with, that you have engineering, product design background.
Mhm.
I have said a few times on the podcast, and I say to my team and clients all the time, like, our best projects are when there's a tight coupling between product management and design. And the times we struggle, and I think teams struggle, digital product design and development struggles, when there's a bit of a disconnect between product and UX.
Mhm.
You play both roles. Any any advice, any best practices, like how can we help? I mean, there's a lot of overlap in what we're doing in both of these expertise. Like, any lessons learned or best practices that you apply if you're stepping into a new environment, maybe from design or even a product perspective, for helping kind of
Mhm.
coalesce the groups?
Yeah. Well, like you said, there is a lot of overlap, and I really just try to embrace that and really think about, we're all on the same team. And I think that the overlap is an opportunity to bring us closer together. Because I also think that there can be this natural human instinct when people are overlapping in roles and responsibilities. It gets a little confusing, and then there can be, a little insecurity, and it kind of feeds the competitive nature of the teams. So I just try to kind of flip the perspective a little bit more toward the collaborative side, and to think about, the strength in that overlap and just the strength in a relationship. Then, I tend to feel as though a lot of the business acumen, at least the kinds of artifacts that are going to come out in a project, often sit more on the product side. And so I think that's an important thing to bring into a design conversation. But as a design lead, you can lean on your teammates for some of that, but still leverage it for your own insight. And then, um, the leadership opportunities for design work, I think that gets really interesting because, design and tech, especially, I think can, we get caught up in process and playbooks, and sometimes we don't fully kind of break into that transformative magic, for lack of a better way of describing it. Design really is intended to connect in deeply human ways that, are artful. And even when we're talking about, designing very technical interfaces, that can be a deep process. And for design to have some space to really kind of lean into a lot of the messiness to figure out what might be transformative in a human way, that's stuff that product teams are not usually doing. So, kind of figuring out the right ways of balancing, all the jobs that need to be done, so that, where there's not overlap, the teams can really own that, and do more in the areas where they can really, really shine.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that overlap. I like the idea of finding that overlap and finding space to work together on things and create some shared ownership, but also feel like there's parts of your role, whether it's product or design, that are unique to that role, and you can still have ownership there. When
Mm.
they're blended, or there's muddled, or leadership isn't clear, I think sometimes you're right. It leads a lot to I'm going to sort of stand my ground. I own this, and it puts up a few more walls maybe than they do. And I think you're right. It's probably around insecurity of like, well, if I lose this, I lose it and I don't own it anymore, or this feels like a design thing. I don't know why product's involved here, or vice versa. And people get really defensive. And um, I think strong design and product leadership can avoid that. And many times it's can be an interpersonal connection between those two leads to ensure that their teams they know, I don't want to say stay in their lane, but they know what their lane is, and they know where they overlap, and that's where we're going to work together versus kind of work maybe independently or in parallel. So appreciate that, and I think it's I don't know, this ever sort of growing disciplines of product management and design are still kind of being hashed out, and I think a lot of design leaders are looking for answers for how they can best work with product folks.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I know I don't know how else to say this. I think 2023 has been a pretty challenging year for the tech world in general. I mean, we talk about macroeconomics, but it's not my space, and I'll get confused. But it's been sort of a tough time in general,
Mhm.
and I know I've been having tons of like one-on-one conversations with design and creative leadership. I think in a conversation we had, you've been doing the same thing, and I think it's kind of an interesting time to talk about to take like a little bit of a pulse, like
Yeah.
what's happening, what are you seeing happening in design leadership, and if we can pivot to what do we see might happen in 2020, in 2024. But like as you're out there talking to people in the field, like what are you seeing, what are you hearing, and I'm happy to lend a bit
Yeah.
of voice in terms of what I've been hearing as well.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting year. It's been a really interesting few years, right? And I tend to work in the innovation niche. So I do a lot of consulting. When I'm spending long term on projects or on products, it tends to be in a startup capacity.
Okay.
And I will say that coming through 2022, I started to notice that, both of those areas of the industry were starting to just feel different. Priorities were changing really quickly. Investments were changing really quite quickly. The terms on what we needed to do to kind of, raise the next round, all of it was just changing in ways I had never noticed before. So when I came into 2023, I was actually in a venture capital fellowship at the beginning of the year when Silicon Valley Bank collapsed. And the leader of that fellowship had multiple portfolio companies, banking, SVB. So I had this like front row seat to realize like, okay, these kind of the inkling that I had that things were changing. I'm just like watching all of these things just sort of, I don't know, it felt like implosion. And I'm literally watching leaders in the industry just like visibly sweating, trying to make sense of what was happening. So I think the good thing for me in working in innovation is it's just a messy space. Even when the foundation is pretty solid, the work that we do, it's uncertain. Things often go sideways. Failure is part of the process. And so I tend to lean into messiness. And even with all the things that are happening in the industry, I feel like, we're going to rebound in some ways, but we can see that systems are breaking down all around us. I mean, there's crises in climate, in finance, in healthcare. I mean, just our big systems are reworking. Things are shifting. So I feel as though leadership has to figure out how to respond to this, because I feel as though it's probably a cultural norm for a generation or more. So I think, that can be perceived as bad news. But I think there's also big opportunity there. And I feel as though just what I'm seeing with this year, as budgets have been cut and just landscapes changing to figure out how to, have design situated in different ways, engineering teams doing more with less, everybody focusing on AI, just trying to get a foothold in an area that's, still high growth. Um, it's exhausting for teams to be doing all of this work. Leaders are just kind of learning alongside everyone else and also trying to have some cultural balance to it. Yeah, when I came out of the fellowship, I ended up just kind of I was thinking about fundraising at the beginning of the year and decided this is not the year to do a seed round. So as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I ended up talking to hundreds of people and just, yeah, noticing some trends. One of them I just kind of talked about, just with the nature of how orgs were changing and people were just needing to do a little more with less, and just, working through the uncertainty. All of this piled on to, just some exhaustion of the past couple of years being a little uncertain. But there are a lot of people who have, been laid off or decided to not do their startup or whatever, who kind of inspired by just doing something different and feeling some urgency and kind of using that adversity to inspire creativity, which is a real thing. I mean, trauma often does inspire really creative thinking, really creative solutions, and then we end up having major breakthroughs. So that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, well, I mean, thank you. A great sort of summary of what you're hearing out in the market, and I definitely want to get to the latter point around exhaustion and kind of taking a step back and how you can maybe in a creative space pivot into something new, like having a breakthrough. I want to go back to this sense of being in the innovation space as team sizes are getting cut. Roadmaps are, this is what I'm hearing, right? Team sizes are getting cut, spending and budgets definitely being reduced. Every team, every person being asked to do more with the same or less resources. I've seen a pretty big shift to, let's look at shoring up our revenue and revenue producing items, but not big strategic transformations. Let's put those maybe a little bit on hold. Being in the innovation space, like, I mean, I love the idea of playing off of kind of the chaos and getting into the messy middle and sort of like pulling it apart. But are you also like, are you changing how you talk about innovation? Are you doing things differently? Do you find yourself, and I don't, when I say tactical, I think people get offended by it. Not you. Like people think like, oh, we can't do tactical stuff. We do tons of amazing tactical work at Fuzzy Math to move digital products and platforms forward, and I'm proud of that work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are you shifting how you're talking about innovation? Are you not using that innovation with a little I versus a big I? Like, how's it changed in how you're presenting to folks and talking about it, or even in the work you're doing? And maybe it's the same, but I'm curious
Yeah.
if it's shifted at all.
Yeah. Well, I do see, I see value in doing what needs to be done for the incremental growth. And I tend to talk about the tactical stuff as the incremental growth, where we're still up leveling and maybe optimizing. We're still doing things that are, just more directly tied to, um, just financial benefit in short order. And innovation is risky, but I think it's also risky to not do it. And especially when we can see that all these systems, and even, I mean, just a lot of um, infrastructure. When I think about innovation, it doesn't have to be doing what's never been done before. It's just kind of a pretty radical undertaking. So it could even be retooling some of the infrastructure that's crumbling right now. So I feel as though the parallel path, I feel like that's always been kind of the key to making this stuff work in a business, and it still is. I know with everything being a little tighter this year, um, I mean, the year's almost over. So those people who have been thinking about, okay, how are we going to leap forward when, the interest rates are back under control or whatever the pinch is, um, they're going to have a head start, and they're going to have, ways to kind of rebuild the war chest, coming into the next couple years. So, and I feel like with the work that we do, I mean, part of what I think inspires a lot of designers is making things better, making the world a better place. And so I do feel as though there's a lot of problems to solve. Let's kind of use some of the creative energy and keeping people engaged. I think that's one thing to kind of mitigate how um, overwhelming and exhausting everything has been. Big challenges, even though it seems like it's a big lift, it can really renew the spirit at a time where a lot of teams need it.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is great. So, because I think you're right. And I think a lot of designers who are being asked to parallel path or maybe work on the more incremental path than the larger leaps. And by the way, love the parallel path. I have lots of parallel path slides. Hey, we can't do this yet, Mark and Fuzzy Math. How can you tackle both these things at once? So I like the idea, and I think it's a smart way to describe how design can be adaptive to the environment
Mhm.
of the business, how we can deliver on short term and help short term goals and still set some longer term targets. Let's say you have a design team and they are getting exhausted. It's been a tough couple of years. They're doing work that may not feel like it's the most creative in nature. How do you lead a team through that? Do you do side projects? Do you do encourage personal projects? Like, how do you keep the creativity going? And if it connects to some of the exhaustion comments, great. If not, I definitely want to go there because I think it's an interesting space.
Yeah.
But how do you keep people motivated and creative in an environment where maybe the CEO is like, hey, do these 50 things as quickly as humanly possible because we got to release, that's got to go out. And
Yeah.
everyone's like running around
Yeah.
and it doesn't feel like the most creative endeavor at that point.
Right. Yeah. To that, I would say prioritize. And then for the, just figuring out how to be resilient and just to continue to yeah, renew that creative spirit. I'm fascinated with this topic. I have always been, personally invested in how I do this for myself, also as a working parent. I mean, there's just been years that I've been stretched way too thin. And so, I adopted a lot of practices around personal development for myself. And then, in 2020, started to think more about how I should be connecting these dots in my professional culture because, like I was suggesting at the beginning, a big part of leadership role is thinking about the energy in the creative culture and how are people collaborating and do people even want to show up to work, let alone break through and do something innovative. For a big chunk of 2020, it did not feel like anybody had, any extra umph. And, of course, it was also just a time of maybe survival. And so, I think there's a balance of what we do personally to just feel like we have the kind of safety and security we need. From there, I feel like relationships are key to just kind of this exponential growth and perspective. And that can be really exciting, just starting to see things in new ways. And then experimentation and doing, more work, taking on the side projects, taking on the personal projects. I kind of see that as the next layer where you have to have a few other, I think, layers of capacity, built into a practice and sustaining. I mean, creativity just takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of reckoning with uncertainty, just a lot of courage really to just show up and kind of face things that you don't really know the answers, and you're going to lead the way through it and into it and take responsibility for it and put money on the table for it. I actually have spent a lot of my extra time just training more about how to coach people through this, the psychology of creativity. I love biohacking, thinking about neurologically what's happening and how to kind of, um, just strip some of the thinking out of the process and just really think about like what's happening actually physically with our energy. So the whole smattering of that tool set ends up being pretty effective.
Yeah. I mean, that's great. I think a lot of design leaders struggle with that balance or business leaders in general. Like, how
Mhm.
much do we focus on culture? How much do we focus on personal growth? How much do we, therefore, it seems like it could sacrifice professional growth if we're really focused on culture and we're also focused on the bottom line. And I think it's a lot to balance. I can see how an external coach like yourself could help folks
Mhm.
prioritize that cultural health within their organization. And do you have any like tips during your coaching? And I just a plug for you, if folks need this set of services, you offer it, which is amazing, and I'll allow you to provide ways to contact at the very end. But are there a few tips? Is it really about prioritization of effort and energy that you kind of advocate for?
I think so. And just for, I think about everybody as a leader. And so, in the one on ones and in the connection points with every person on a team, there should be part of the conversation that's about the nuts and bolts of what needs to be done for the job, but then a part of it that is about, their growth as a person, their growth as a creative leader, and what's going to help them level up, like what's really exciting for them. And, it can be just a small part of a recurring conversation. And over time, it really adds up. People feel supported and feel as though taking those risks that kind of set them apart as a leader, that kind of move their work in really big steps forward. That's where I see it. I really see it in the relationships and the conversations, and just thinking holistically about growth, and then just kind of looking for the little opportunities to apply it in the day-to-day things. And then it gets a lot more nuanced from there, and a lot of the people who are having the one-on-one conversations may not feel well equipped for all of the coaching conversation. I think it would be great if all teams, innovation teams, just teams that are doing creative work, and I think if engineering is highly creative work, just had coaching resources of people who really understood the kind of personal nature of this, and just how to set people up for doing the best work of their career.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think, thank you for sharing,
Mhm.
and for offering a vital service. I also think there's this component of giving ourselves a little bit of grace too, right? Like the creative endeavor is um, you know, it can be an energy suck. The leadership can drain energy, and the interpersonal stuff, especially for a lot of folks, a lot of folks that I work with who tend to be a little bit more introverted than extroverted. There's like kind of it's a lot of energy to do that, and it can feel like a little bit of a burden. And you kind of, I like your point about do this in small pieces to start and make it a consistent kind of rhythm in conversations you're having with the people that you lead, and try not to take on too much, and give yourself a little bit of grace that this is going to take a while, and that this is hard work and it is draining, and to take time for yourself as well, because I think a lot of leaders carry a burden, and don't always step back from that. And like I said, okay, made a mistake, or I learned from that, or I need a little bit of space here to recharge, and
Mhm.
feel they can't take that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of overlap in leadership and creativity. And it's always made sense to me, at the heart of both of those, we're cultivating vision and figuring out how to use voice, use our voice, use design as a means to our voice, and the voice can be for a brand. But getting those two things right, I mean, it's simple that there's two things, but then it's there's a lot of complexity, I guess, to doing that in a really resonant way, in ways that are really aligned with business goals, with the cultural moment, really truly being able to deliver on the impact. And so, being able to be clear on vision and confident about vision, and know that this is going to connect. You are so confident it's going to connect that you will lead, dozens of people and millions of dollars down this path. That takes a certain level of connection to, you have to get out of your head. There's just different intelligence centers, and people think about slowing down or disconnecting as maybe just something to restore, but that's also where you kind of tap into that visionary work, and where you really get the confidence to kind of move things forward, to innovate. So it's necessary. And I think there's a reason why most executives all have coaches, and people who can remind them. It gets very busy and very chaotic at times, and you just have to step back and figure out what's the vision here, and how does this really feel. And all of us, I mean, our industry, there's so many smart people. We are just all in our heads so much of the time, and that's about a third of the intelligence we need to win in this space.
Yeah, right on. That's fantastic. I have a quick question as we sort of wrap up. Are there any resources that you recommend, a good book on this that you think could help? And then please let folks know where they can find you, because you offer these coaching services, and I'm quite sure that you might get somebody reaching out after the podcast that feels like there's space for them to learn from your experience.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So, well, brynmccoy.com, I try to keep things about design and leadership there. And then Made by Mineral is my coaching brand. And um, I'm trying to think of good books. I have this whole smattering of books
Yes.
back here. I'm constantly reading stuff. And um, I mean, I guess, the biohacking is the most interesting and kind of just like easily applicable things that I've been working with lately. And I've been really interested in Dan Siegel's work. Dan is a Harvard MD and then has moved into a lot of work in mindfulness at UCLA, and has a book called Aware that really, I think, has an easy to assimilate and practice model of just kind of paying attention to what's going on around us, and then being able to tap into all that intelligence I was just talking about. So that's I think about the resources for ourselves a little more than all the business books and all the strategy books that are out there. So I kind of feel like we're moving into a phase where we need new strategies. We need more innovation. So I'm all for supporting the leaders to make it happen.
Fantastic. Well, we will link to both of your sites, the personal site, the coaching site, and then LinkedIn as well, which I'm sure people can reach out to you. But Bryn, I just want to say thank you for your time and energy today in talking to me and the audience about, I think, a really critical topic in terms of creative leadership and taking time for ourselves and personal development and cultural development. It's a topic that I think everyone is on everyone's mind, but we're not always, to your last point, stepping back and thinking through it. So I just really appreciate the conversation today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Mark.
Yeah, you bet. All right. Thank you.